Hello? Is anybody there? Hello? Oh, hello. I didn't realize anybody was there. I'm Chris Smith, and today on the YNTAAY Minis, we're celebrating Friday the 13th by looking back at my favorite slasher films, Friday the 13th. You know, and I like to call this one Friday the 13th, my favorite kills in the franchise. I'm not in favor of killing people in real life, but in horror movies, I think it's sometimes fun. Did you know that Friday the 13th, when I was a little child, I thought was the most glamorous of the slasher movies that there was? I mean, of course, Halloween is very classy. Friday the 13th is a good old-fashioned schlocky slasher movie, and I always wanted to be in one and get killed because they always had fun props and fake blood. Now, I thought we would look back at some of my favorites. Now, in the first one, there's Marcy. That movie was in 1980, and she got an axe in her face, much like this one. And she made the saddest little speech about how she used to have this scary dream when she was a child and rivers of blood when it would rain. And oh, it was so heartbreaking. One time I tricked my mother into coming into the room. I called her in, and I had it all queued up. And right when she got to the room to see what I wanted to show her, I clicked the button and the thing started, and she was like, poor Marcy was like, and my mother was traumatized to see such a thing. You know, Kevin Bacon also appeared in the movie, and he got the classic arrow through the throat death. And yes, he played Jack. And that was very impressive that he had such a, I don't know if that was his debut, but it was one of his early films. And then we went on to Friday the 13th Part 2, which I think is a pretty good movie. And one of my favorites is poor Jeff and Sandra. You remember them. They got the classic scene where they got the little pole stuck through them while they were having sex, and it went right through the bed. Now, poor Mark, who was in the wheelchair, he had the best death. You can't see it very well, but he got a machete in the face while he was waiting for his friend to come back so they could go and play around. Now, poor old Vera Sanchez in Friday the 13th Part 3 in Super 3D, she's the one who got an arrow, or got like a flare gun thing in her eye, and it was shot in Super 3D. And then the poor boy, Andy, he was walking on his hands, and he got cut in half. So, kids, don't ever walk on your hands if you don't know who's in the house, because you're just going to be helpless. Now, Friday the 13th, the final chapter came along, and they killed off Jason. And then, would you believe, in Friday the 13th, A New Beginning, spoiler alert, it wasn't even Jason who was the killer. It was some other dude. And two of the victims got, well, here they are, in happier times, and they both got their eyes sort of smushed. And I think she got like what's it called? Like hedge clippers in her eyes. Now you really can't see this one. But remember in Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives, where the girl got her face rammed through the wall of an RV and it made an indentation. Oh, so creative. Then I loved the campiness in Friday the 13th, The New Blood. This was Part 7. And this is the one where the girl has telekinetic powers and has to battle Jason. And one of the victims included this awful girl named Melissa, and she also got an axe in the face. Oh, I apologize that you can't see these better, but we're in the middle of nowhere and it's so dark, lit only by candles and my trusty flashlight. Now, did you all see Friday the 13th, Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan? I loved their ad campaign. They actually started off with one of him ripping through with a machete, I think, the I Heart New York sign, and I guess New York made them stop using that in their ad campaigns. But I think this is still very effective. But what was sad was he didn't take Manhattan until like very toward the very last reel of the movie, and they were on like this little pleasure cruise, these teenagers, and it was false advertising because really he just took a pleasure cruise. Now, one of the villains in that movie was Charles McCulloch was the character. And he was a very vicious man, and he got thrown into a vat of like chemical waste and was like head first down into it, which was very creative. I guess you use what you can find down on the docks when you're in New York. And then we went into outer space for Jason X, or do we just call it Jason 10? I've heard both. But yes, so he was like superhuman even more in space. And there was this girl, and he dunked her face in like hydrogen, in liquid nitrogen stuff. And here she is, her face is all frozen. And then he pushed it, and it's like broke apart. Oh, it was nasty, kids. Don't try that at home. And then, now I don't count that very last one that was the remake. I didn't like that. Made Jason a ghoul that protected like marijuana farms. But before that one, we had Freddy versus Jason, which was an old-fashioned horror movie. What year was that? Like an old-fashioned monster movie. 2003. And Freddy Krueger actually got killed in that one. He even got his hand or arm cut off. But I think his head winked at the end. And one of my favorites in that was this guy named Trey. He was sort of a jerk, and then he got his got folded up in the bed. Here he is, look, and he had like a beer in his hand, and the beer was like. So those are just some of my favorite kills in Friday the 13th. But I suggest you have a marathon now that it's the Halloween season, and watch all the Friday the 13th movies with someone you love. Maybe you could even trick your mothers into coming into the room and then saying, but only if they're not faint of heart, because you don't want to scare anyone to death. Okay, goodbye everybody. Happy Friday the 13th.